Welcome to Hexapodcast, brief discussions about insects and entomologists with your hosts, John Steyerman and Lee Dyer.
All right. Hey, John.
Hi, Lee.
I want to tell you a story real quick. This is a true story. I told my entomology class this story. So I went on a run the other day in Reno, and I'd run about 5 miles and I was almost back. And I went down the side street. I was like, I'm going to try this street. And there was a big sidewalk, but there was a guy, and I thought, oh, there's a guy laying down on the sidewalk. But as I got closer, I could see that there was a bunch of blood coming from his head, and the blood was still flowing. It pooled up, but you could also see the blood running down towards the street. And there were some flies. So there was some caliphorids. And curiously, to me, because I thought these showed up later, there were some phorid flies at the blood. I noticed that, but I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the flies. I called 911. Ambulance came and they took them away. Sadly, a few days later, the renowned hospital called and wanted to know more information about them. And I said, I just am the guy who called 911 and identified the flies. He had passed away. They were trying to figure out his next of kin. I have no idea what happened to him, but it was kind of weird that he wasn't dead yet, because it took a few days, because they called me like 3 days later and he had just died. And there were already caliphorids. The phorids on the blood was unusual to me. I just want to ask you about that right away, and that'll lead right into the theme for today's Hexapodcast.
I think that caliphorids are among the first flies to get there when something's dying. And yeah, sometimes they might get there before things are dead. And I remember something similar to that. There was a cat when I was in New Orleans. There was this like young kitten that was not looking good, and I don't know, hanging around the house or something. And I noticed that it had eggs glued to it. It was like walking around, but like looked really sickly. And there were eggs.
Yeah.
I'm almost sure they were caliphord eggs on it.
I remember this because you brought them into the lab.
So, like, I don't know how they know, but I think they know, like, when things are going down. Like, maybe they can smell something like, this thing, it may not be dead yet, but it's going to die soon.
Well, I was a little surprised, but I don't come across many near dead people in the street. But what about the phorids at the blood?
Are you sure they were phorids?
Well,
Phorids are small.
I got close enough I could see a little hump. What else would look like that?
Also, they act like phorids. They call them the scuttle flies, right? They kind of scuttle around
Exactly.
real fast. Yeah.
No, they had all of the gestalt of a phorid, but I didn't collect any. I mean, they asked me to take his if he had a pulse, so that was the only touching I did. I didn't want any flies to land on me. But yeah, I'm assuming they were phorids. Let's assume, for the sake of discussion, that they were phorids. Why would phorids be going to fresh blood? Is that something that seems unusual to me? I know that phorids come later in the succession of dead things, but fresh blood?
Well, that might be kind of tasty for anything, like a butterfly might come to blood, right?
That's
For
true.
the salts and
Fair enough.
stuff.
Wait a second. Are these guys forensic entomologists? Like CSI entomology dudes?
Well, that's the topic for today. Forensic entomology. I know very little about it, but I do have some stories, and I thought maybe as a dipterist, you may have some stories. So I thought we'd just talk about it a little bit. My understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the community ecology behind forensic entomology is fairly well established. That, and we're talking about humans here, but it's the same for pigs and, anything that's kind of similar to human. Another one bites the dust. When it dies, you first get caliphorids. After that, you might get some muscids within minutes. Or as you said, it could happen even before they're completely dead, or at least that was what I observed. Then you also get sarcophagids. Probably the sarcophagids will larviposit, and the caliphorids will put eggs in little parts. Once there's maggots, the temperature, because this is all kind of temperature dependent, right? The temperature will change, and then you'll start getting these predaceous beetles. And I can't remember which families of predaceous beetles show up.
Probably a lot of staphylinids, I would think.
Oh, staphylinids, yes, definitely. So you get, staphylinids and other things. After that, the body starts bloating, and the temperature has changed and the olfactory cues have changed, then you actually get beetles like sylphids and other beetles that are actually consuming the rotting flesh. They're not just predators of the flies. And then after that, it starts to dry out. Then you get things like dermestids. And people actually use dermestids to clean all the bone of something, and they'll bring in some dermestids to clean it all up.
I have little to add. Like you'd think, because I study flies, like I'd know a lot about, flies that go to carrion, but I kind of avoided that. I was never that into.
I
I was
wonder
never that
why.
into that.
Dr. Steierman, in Season 1, Episode 3, Tales from the Trachea, you said you loved horror movies, right? You could be the forensic entomology consultant for horror movies.
Yeah, I think there's a difference though between sort of liking, being like, in a fantasy kind of situation and watching a movie and, blood and gore, and then being in like a real situation. I'm not, I never liked dissecting things like in high school and college. Like, I mean, I did it. It was okay, especially when it got to mammals though, and I had to dissect a cat.
Oh
I
yeah.
didn't like it. I thought I kind of, I don't know.
And I'm not dead. But please don't stop on my account.
Even though there are lots of great applications of studying flies in terms of decomposition and forensic entomology, I've kind of avoided those things. I have friends that do that stuff, but I don't really have much to add in terms of the overall sort of community ecology, phenology of who's attracted. I think you summarized it pretty well. And of course, that's the basis, like what you said, it's pretty well established in part because it's been studied, right? In like the
Yeah.
body farm and stuff. They
Since
throw
the
out dead
30s.
bodies and they've documented what comes when and at what how fast different flies and other insects develop, so they can you can say, oh, this body's been must have been here for at least 3 hours because there's like a second instar sarcophagid.
That's the part that's fun, and that's the part that the students get into. And it is, you're right, they have these body farms. So we've been trying to get one here at UNR because there aren't very many in the United States. And so we were thinking of putting one up in this forest that we own, that the university owns. So we need a sort of a remote spot because nobody can access this forest. It's really hard to get there, and but it's at elevation. So it seems to me that if you're at high elevation, it's a total different community that would start coming to these.
So where are you going to get the bodies?
That's not my problem. My role would be to have students collect the adult insects and put them in the museum, and we would have a collection of dead body insects that were reared. So yeah, I agree with you that this is really well known. And there was a case in the 30s in the UK where this doctor had killed his wife and chopped her into little pieces.
The infamous Jigsaw murders of 1935 became one of the first major murder investigations solved largely through modern forensic science. After Lancashire doctor Buck Ruxton murdered and dismembered his wife and housemaid, investigators used the ecology and developmental stages of carrion-associated fly and beetle communities to estimate time since death. The insect evidence helped establish a timeline that tied the remains to Ruxton's movements after he dumped the bodies in a ravine near Moffat.
I've heard of similar kinds of things, and I guess you could watch. What was that show? That there was a show where there was like a kind of forensic entomology kind of person. There's some popular TV show.
I had no idea there was a
Bones.
show
I
about
think it was
this.
called Bones or Bone or.
No, I have students come to me who that's what they want to do, and that I know nothing about it. But if we get this body farm, very curious. I don't want to go do the collecting. I don't really like bodies that much that are dead or that are almost dead.
I'm not dead. What? Nothing. Here's your ninepence. I'm not dead. Yeah. He says he's not dead. Yes, he is. I'm not.
But I would like to see what's reared out. There's one forensic entomologist. He's told me a lot of stories. And one of my favorite stories was a story that I think you'll appreciate. The quick version of the story is that, and he helped solve this crime, where there are these two guys in Colorado, in Fort Collins, who decided to take a road trip down to Tucson. So they drove down to Tucson and they went partying and they were out all night. And one of the guys ended up with a prostitute.
No, I'm a horologist.
So was my mum, but she didn't crow about it as loud as you.
And so he threw his friend, who was really drunk, into the car and just closed the car door. And this was in the middle of July. And then he went off with the prostitute.
No, I'm a horologist.
And he was with her all day. And he came back to the car at the end of the day in the middle of July, which was closed, with his friend in it. And his friend had baked to death in the car. So he freaked out. He said, I'm going to get in big trouble. And he just kept his friend where he was in the passenger seat and drove all the way back to Fort Collins.
Bring out today. Here's one.
And when he got to Fort Collins in the middle of the night, he just dumped the body. I tried to forget about it. But when Boris was called, he collected a bunch of the larvae and he brought them back to his lab. And he rears them out. I don't know how he rears them out, but he rears them. This is something that we all do. We take immatures and we want to see what the adult is. He said, oh yeah, this guy's been dead for this long. This is the interval based on these flies. And I'll bring him back and rear him out just to double check. And so about a week later, he was working on his computer and he looked up and he saw one of the flies flying around. And he was like, wait a second. It's like, that's a tropical fly.
Like a fly is a very lazy name for an insect.
And so he called up the cops right away. He's like, this guy there's no way he died here. That fly could not have oviposited on this guy. It had to be somewhere near the border. And he actually guessed, Phoenix or Tucson or, somewhere in Arizona. And that helped them, change the whole investigation. They ended up catching the guy eventually. That's how they know the other parts of the story. I thought you'd like that because immature insects are really understudied and we often misidentify them, especially if it's a fly.
Just because it flies. Then birds can also fly. They can fly more. Why aren't they called flies?
Oh, and then second, it was Tucson where you lived, and you probably saw some things that were a little bit more commonly found in the tropics when you were in Tucson.
Yeah, I mean that is true. I mean, there's an interesting tropical influence of the insect fauna down in southeastern Arizona, as you're well aware, having worked down there a lot, and so yeah, that story makes sense to me. Probably a lot of this stuff isn't reared out anymore though, because probably most of forensic entomology now you just grab the larva and you sequence it, right? And then they have probably a pretty good sort of background data set of different flies. They still have to know what stage it is, though.
Yeah,
you might want to.
I don't know about that. If somebody died in Tucson and some weird tropical thing got them, I mean, so the whole thing about sequencing is that you have to have a library. And sure, a lot of things that colonize humans, there's probably a bit of a library, but flies are pretty diverse, aren't they? And there could be variation even within a genus on what their development is like. So knowing what instar it is and how long they're in an instar seems important to rear to an adult. But maybe you're right. I don't know.
No, I think that definitely, molecular tools are being used more. And actually, the people that really know, sarcophagids. Like, there's like one guy in North America that really knows sarcophagids. He's retired.
Yeah.
There's one guy that really knows caliphorids, like the whole family in North America. He's retired. We're losing that taxonomic expertise.
Is there anybody in the United States who knows tachinids?
You're looking at him, man. No, it's interesting that, like sarcophagids, I mean, they're called flesh flies, but most of them don't don't feed on carrion, or don't lay their larvae on carrion. But,
do they larviposit? So sarcophagids
yes.
will probably larviposit, right? And then the caliphorids all probably look for little spots like holes or something, or cuts where they put their eggs in, because they oviposit, don't they?
Yeah, they lay eggs, and I think typically on the outside, or probably like near the eye, and like soft spots that are easy to eat.
Boris showed these pictures and films of like maggots like they've eaten all the eyes and you can see them moving around. They're really disgusting films.
I think I saw a talk by that same guy that like yeah showed us the most gruesome pictures, and he's like, okay, here's like the stages of like human like decay, and like there's like a weeping stage where like fluid like dark comes out of the eyes and other orifices, and he called it like the weeping
That's
stage
right.
of, and then there's like the later on the bloatation stage, whatever it's called.
Bloated
Yeah, I don't
stage.
know.
And
It's
then the
pretty
skin
gross.
turns like all dark during that bloating phase.
Okay, let's skip over this next part, where more graphic details are given about maggots eating decomposing bodies, and skip forward. We now join our entomological heroes discussing a true forensic entomology film that shows entomologists entering the crime scene in a dark apartment building.
All the doors were closed and all the windows were closed, and yet there were all these flies in there that had like you
That was the
can't keep them
exact
out.
point that he was making in the talk that he gave. So there's
Well,
another story he told, and it relates to the idea that we might be putting one of these facility where we put dead bodies out to study forensic entomology at a place in the mountains where it freezes. But there's an old couple, and they were living off of his pension. And it was a pension that when he died, he stopped drawing money off of it, and she didn't, inherit it. She wouldn't keep getting money once he died. And so he did die, and so she put him in the chest freezer, and because she wanted to keep collecting the check, she didn't know what to do. And after about 4 months, she felt kind of guilty that he was sitting there in the chest freezer. So she took him out and put him on the porch in the rocking chair, and then called the cops, and so they came and they got Boris there right away. And I don't know what it was I don't know what parts caused them to call Boris, but maybe there were a lot of insects that had colonized once he'd thawed out. Well, he noticed that like freezer burns and stuff, which is not his job, but he also said this is really weird because I've never seen a fly community like this, but it is a fly community that would be early on. This guy's obviously been dead for a long time, and they figured that one out pretty fast, that what had happened in that case. But I think the freezing thing is interesting because flies are probably not very active if somebody's murdered up in the mountains. It seems like nothing would come. Or is that true? I don't know.
I don't know, like, I guess if there was just a brief warm period, that might be enough because it's interesting. Like if it's cold and then it gets warm in like January, you'll see like Californians and stuff. I think some of them overwinter as adults because all of a sudden they're there, and you're like, wait, where'd this fly come from?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I'm sure that really changes things. The climate's gonna, in the like southern US and like Florida, like things probably happen really fast, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Up in the
That's
mountains, things
why,
are slower.
and that's why I was surprised that I think you do still have to rear things out, especially because it's so variable, like based on season and location and
Another thing is I think there's been a lot of work on, keys to the larvae as well. So like this,
yeah,
like if you look at the spiracles, you can often tell species
sure.
apart, and where like little hairs are or little denticles and things on the larvae. And I think that's actually been pretty well studied. So like not everything, but the
That's
common stuff.
Sorry, Steierman. We had to skip your long Mississippi dead body story with graphic details. Listeners, you'll have to visit John to hear this story. Back to phorid flies.
this idea that they can get there so fast. And in the case of Californians, maybe even before something's dead. But I was always impressed with those phorid flies that parasitize the bullet ants, the big, huge tropical ants. And Feener used to go, and Brian Brown used to go, and they would want to collect them. So they'd take an ant, and they just out there in the forest, and they'd smush its head, and forage would come immediately. How did they get there so fast?
Magic?
It's magic, you know.
No,
It
no, I
is
think,
magic.
I mean, probably that, they probably hang around forward nests, kind of in the vicinity, you'd think, right? And
Uh, Yeah.
Maybe they hang around until they smell like the alarm pheromone and they're like, boom.
The phorids hang around Paraponera nests.
Yeah.
Like I've seen Brian Brown just do it like on a foraging ant, like step on it, and then the phorids are there. It is magic. But I think it's the same with these caliphorids. It's like, what were they doing before the guy was almost dead? They were just sitting on the fence post?
I'm just sitting on a fence. You can say I got no sense.
I mean, they go to flowers, they're all over the place. They're hanging out, waiting for dog poop.
The thing is, they do have alternative food sources. So they're utilizing an alternative food source, and then there's a dead body and they go right to it. Do you think a lot of them just do not successfully reproduce? There just is no resource for them. So there's nothing for them to oviposit or larviposit on.
Well, I mean, that's kind of pure conjecture, but
what's wrong with pure conjecture on a podcast?
There's nothing wrong with that. But like, what do I think? Like, do a lot of them fail to lay eggs? No, I don't think so. I think they're really good at finding, at smelling dead stuff.
Now, don't worry, Stanley. Mommy's going to hide the body.
They probably come from pretty far away sometimes. They can smell these odors, these chemicals that are released by carrion. And I bet you most of them, find a place to lay eggs. And then a lot of the mortality is happening in that larval stage, eggs, larvae, pupae.
Dr. Steierman, how do you know what the adult flies are doing?
You can catch a caliphorid and you can sequence it and you can kind of get like eDNA from caliphorid, right? And it was mosquitoes they used, and they found some like, Vietnamese like antelope that like, it was a new species or something, or thought extinct or something like that, but they can do that with these carrion feeding flies too. They can sequence that fly and they can say, oh, this thing was probably feeding on a cat or a deer or whatever.
I like it. I think it's a great tool, but it's a tool and it's just one tool. It's great. You figured out what this eats, but you didn't figure out anything about its natural history, like how it attacks or what else it does, how many of them are attacking. There's so many other parts of the story that you miss.
Yeah, you don't have to sell me on natural history. Like I love that stuff too. I mean, that's part of the reason that I'm here, talking to you about bugs, is that I like to observe things.
Yeah.
And no, I agree. We have more and more tools so we can get at questions and patterns that maybe were much more difficult to get at. But I agree. I don't think these tools replace the value of observation.
How are we going to wrap this up? I know that we just barely touched on the whole science of forensic entomology, but we could do another episode where we bring a guest on.
Wait, one quick word before you end the podcast. Like, as I mentioned, like the people that really know those groups of flies, like the taxonomy and all the diversity, like they're old and retired. And I don't know if there are any like newcomers. Like, I think there's a lot of room like for someone to become the next, expert on blowflies or the next expert on flesh flies, because like in North America, we're losing that expertise.
Yeah, that's a great way to end it.
Ditto.
This is Hexapodcast.
Thanks again to all you insect lovers for listening to Hexapodcast.
On the wheel right by your side. Hold on to the end of the line. Lay with you while the night is still. Proves you haven't lost your will. Soon the road will be clear. The days only go up from here.